Hello, third graders. This is Miss Taylor. Our video today is about relationships in ecosystems. I love science, and I hope you enjoy learning about all of the different organisms in ecosystems and how they are interconnected. So, how do organisms depend on each other in ecosystems? All ecosystems have many kinds of living organisms, plants and animals, that interact with each other. Organisms depend on each other and often compete for resources like food. Food chains show feeding relationships and how energy flows in an ecosystem. In order to survive, all organisms need energy. I do, you do, every living organism needs energy. That's why we get energy from our food. So, different types of organisms have specific names. Let's start with the producer. Plants are producers. Why? Well, because they make their own food from sunlight, air, and water in a process called photosynthesis. Pretty amazing. So plants are called producers. They make or produce their own food. All other living organisms, animals, are consumers. Animals are consumers because they eat or consume other living organisms, plants, animals, or both plants and animals. So, animals are called consumers because we eat or consume our food. Decomposer. Oh, I love decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that break down dead plants and animals into smaller pieces. They also break down waste. Can you imagine what would happen if there were no decomposers? Dead organisms everywhere? Waste everywhere? That would be bad news. So decomposers are very, very important. The smaller pieces are nutrients that can be used again by living organisms. Plants use those nutrients to grow. So it's kind of like a cycle where the decomposers are breaking down those dead plants and animals and waste products, but then plants get to use those nutrients to grow and be healthy. Amazing. Let's look at some examples of decomposers. Fungi, like mushrooms, are very important, especially in forest ecosystems. You can find a lot of fungi. Earthworms in the soil, in the earth. Termites, millipedes, and other insects. And tiny bacteria. Most bacteria is too small to be seen without magnification. Now, consumers have different names depending on what kind of food they eat or consume. Herbivore. Herbivores are animals that eat only plants, like zebras or elephants. Omnivore. Animals that eat plants and other animals are called omnivores. Like that raccoon. The raccoon might eat some insects or some fresh berries, maybe even a clam that they find in the stream. So, any animal that eats plants and other animals, both, is called an omnivore. And carnivore. An animal that only eats other animals is called a carnivore, like lions, birds of prey, tigers, and many more. Predator and prey. An animal that hunts other animals is a predator. The animal a predator hunts is called prey. The cheetah is the predator and the fawn is the prey. So now that we know all of those different types of organisms, we're going to look at them together in food chains. A food chain shows a feeding relationship among organisms in a specific area or environment. They show the flow of energy in the ecosystem. Food chains begin with energy from the sun. Food chains include the sun, producers, consumers, and decomposers. They include producers that are herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. They show predator and prey relationships. Let's look at an aquatic ecosystem food chain. Aquatic ecosystems are water ecosystems. They can be freshwater or saltwater. There are different food chains in ponds, rivers, swamps, marshes, streams, and oceans. Here's an example of a kelp forest ecosystem in the northern Pacific Ocean. So of course we start with the sun, and then energy from the sun goes to the kelp. The kelp is a producer because it's a plant, and it makes its own energy using the energy from the sun. So the arrows in a food chain are very important. They show where the energy is moving. Now, this sea urchin is most likely an herbivore because it is munching on the kelp. The urchin eats the kelp, so energy from the kelp moves to the sea urchin. Then the sea otter eats the sea urchin. Energy from the sea urchin goes to the sea otter. Now, if along the way, when the sea otter dies, or maybe the sea urchin would die, maybe even the kelp would die, that would mean decomposers would come along and break down those organisms into the nutrients. And then those nutrients would feed back into the plants to help the kelp and other plants grow within that ecosystem. Here's a terrestrial ecosystem food chain. Remembering that terrestrial ecosystems are dry land ecosystems. There are food chains in deserts, forests, rainforests, and grasslands, and other types of dry land ecosystems. We're going to explore this specific food chain in just a moment. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Yellowstone National Park was the United States' first national park. It mostly is in the state of Wyoming. There's Wyoming. A little bit of it is in Idaho, just a tiny little bit, and a little bit is in Montana, but most of it is in Wyoming. And you can see from the map that it takes up a lot of space. There's different types of habitats in Yellowstone. So within this Yellowstone ecosystem, there are many different habitats, including grassland, forest, pond, meadow, and river. So there are a lot of different food chains that we can find in Yellowstone National Park, including this one. Let's look at the sun, remembering that energy from the sun always begins our food chain. Energy from the sun goes to the aspen trees, producers. They produce their own energy through photosynthesis. Energy from the aspen trees goes to the elk. The elk are herbivores. They like to eat the leaves of the elk trees. The aspen trees. Now the wolf is a predator and a carnivore that comes along, hunts the elk. The elk is the wolf's prey. The energy from the elk moves to the wolf. Now again, our decomposers are so very important. If the wolf were to die or the elk, well, the remains of the elk are left behind after the wolf kills the elk. By the way, other animals are going to come and feed off of the elk carcass or the dead body of the elk. The wolf doesn't eat all of the body, but some scavengers, different types of birds, coyotes, other animals will come and feed off the carcass of the elk that the wolf has left behind. But also, decomposers are going to come into effect, like this western giant puffball, and that's in the forests in Yellowstone National Park, to break down the decaying plant and animal matter into nutrients that goes back into feeding the producers, helping them grow. So what have we learned? Summary. An ecosystem is a group of organisms that interact with each other and their environment. All parts of the ecosystem interact with each other and depend on each other. Food chains show feeding relationships and how energy flows in an ecosystem.